Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 11 of this NFL season. It's playoff push time, so I'm going to hopefully get you guys there, or hopefully you guys are actually in position where you don't have to sweat it out too much. You just need to win a game or two or three more to wrap up your playoff positioning. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the video. You guys already know the drill. You're going to get your top two starts and sits at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. As always, starting at the quarterback position, my top start of the week. I spoiled it last night in my waiver wire ad of the week at the quarterback spot, but I'm going to go with Jordan Love against the Chargers. If you are looking to stream a quarterback, if Jordan Love is still on the waivers out there for you, I think he's a viable option this week. Going against that Chargers defense, who's allowed 20.2 points per game to quarterbacks this season in fantasy football. That is the second most allowed across the league. And then we look at the last four games, what the Chargers defense has given up to the quarterback position. They've allowed three different quarterbacks to throw over 250 yards, and two of those three quarterbacks actually threw over 300 yards against their defense. There's been 6 passing touchdowns allowed over their last 4 games. They picked off the quarterback 3 times. But as I always say every single week, when you play a defense that's kind of got some picks over these last 4 games, picks really don't matter in fantasy football unless you do play in a league where the commissioner has adjusted those settings where they interceptions can have a big negative impact on you. But I wouldn't be too worried. I kind of expect this to be a kind of a more of a shootout type of game there in Green Bay. So yeah, I definitely really like Jordan Love as a streaming quarterback option in week 11. My other top start is going to be Jared Goff against the Bears. The Bears have allowed 19.3 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is the 4th most allowed. Now, since Jared Goff has joined the Lions, he's played the Bears 4 times. In those games, he's averaging 240 and a half passing yards. And in those 4 games, he has 8 touchdowns. So he's averaging 2 touchdowns a game against the Bears as a Lion. And he has yet to throw an interception against the Bears with Detroit. So that is something to keep in mind. And when we look at the last 4 games, they have allowed just one quarterback to go over 290 yards, but they have also allowed 6 passing touchdowns over the last 4 games, but also do have 3 interceptions. But I'm factoring in that Jared Goff has pretty much lit up the Bears every single time he's played them since he's came to Detroit a couple years ago. Moving into my top sits now, I'll go ahead and address this. Obviously, those 2 names in seasonal leagues, you're not going to sit them. They're going to be what I call your temper your expectation plays. Now, I know there's going to be people on TikTok that don't watch the full video and don't hear my full reasoning, and you're going to put in there like, oh, how could you sit one of these guys? Yeah, season leagues, you're not going to sit them. But for the people that have been listening to my full videos throughout the season, you know this is not only just a seasonal video. This is like a daily lineups. I do daily lineups every week. I usually just do them on FanDuel. I do factor in my start sits when I do my over-unders on Underdog as well too. So these are names to keep that in mind too. I just want to stress that before I dive into these 2 names, because I have Justin Herbert in a 12-man league. I'm definitely going to be playing him. I am just tempering my expectations that he could have a closer to a floor game. Now, my reasoning for Justin Herbert against the Packers, when we look at what quarterbacks have done against the Packers, they're only scoring 12.7 points per game against Green Bay this season. That is the 4th fewest in the NFL, and mainly what I think is because teams can run the ball against the Packers, so they're leaning into the run, not putting too much pressure on the quarterback to win games. So that's not really leaning into the fantasy football production. And then when we look at the last 4 games, only one quarterback has thrown over 200 yards against the Packers, and then they've only given up 3 passing touchdowns and have picked off the quarterback just once. And another thing to factor in too, there is a chance that Keenan Allen might not play this weekend. He did not practice today, so you got to factor in that Justin Herbert might not have his best option. So again, I'm going to reiterate this. Seasonal leagues, you're going to play him unless you somehow have a better option or somebody that you can turn to on your bench. But daily lineups in your FanDuel, your DraftKings lineups, this is a name I'm going to be looking to avoid this weekend when I get those together. Now, moving into this next name, again, you're going to play Josh Allen. He's a top 5 fantasy quarterback. But, I mean, when you look at these stats, it actually says in seasonal leagues, if you would have a kind of a better option than Josh Allen, you may want to consider it. So let's just look into this really quick, right? So as far as the Jets defense in fantasy, right? This season, they're only giving up 13.4 points per game. That's tied for the fewest allowed to the position. Now, when we look at what Josh Allen has done against the Jets, over his last 4 games against the Jets, he's only averaging 206.75 passing yards per game. Now, he has 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions over the last 4 games he's played the Jets, but 4 of those 7 touchdowns has been passing touchdowns. So he's only averaging 1 passing touchdown over the last 4 games he's played New York. And then I saw an interesting stat this afternoon on X from Ian Hartitz. 3 of Josh Allen's 4 worst fantasy games in his career have all came against the Jets. So for whatever reason, the Jets have had his number, and he has struggled playing them over his last 4 outings when he's played the Jets. Now, when we look at what the Jets have allowed over the last 4 games, they've only allowed 1 quarterback to throw over 200 passing yards, and they've only given up 2 passing touchdowns and have picked off the quarterback 4 times. So they're a really great defense. Josh Allen has a history of struggling against them. So again, in season leagues, yeah, you're going to play Josh Allen. Just temper your expectations. But if you do the daily lineups, that's a name I'm going to be avoiding this week. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits at quarterback. Let's go ahead and keep this moving right into the running back position. My top start of the week, I think this is going to be the week he finally scores a touchdown. Tony Pollard against the Panthers. The Panthers are giving up 25.1 points per game to running backs this year. That's the second most allowed in the NFL. As far as what they've allowed to running backs over the last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different running backs to go over 80 rushing yards, and they have given up 6 running back touchdowns over the last in that time period as well. So I think this is going to be that breakout. I want to call it a breakout game. I guess maybe a breakout game for 2023. I know Pollard hasn't lived up to his expectations as a high fantasy pick, but I think this is the week he's going to come through for his managers. I can see him getting over 100 rushing yards and finally getting his first touchdown of this season. Moving into the next start, I am going to go with Brian Robinson against the Giants. The Giants are giving up 20.4 points per game to running backs this year. That is the 5th most allowed in the NFL. Now, he's played the Giants 3 times in his career, and in 2 of the 3 times he's played them, he's finished over 85 rushing yards. And then what the Giants have allowed over these last 4 games, they've allowed 2 different running backs to run over 75 rushing yards, and they have given up 5 running back touchdowns in that time period as well. So he has a history of success running the ball well against them. It's a struggling defense. It's a deflated team, especially if you saw that report from their locker room today. So I could definitely see Brian Robinson having a ceiling performance in week 11. My top sit of the week, I am going to go with the KC running back Isaiah Pacheco against the Eagles. They're pretty much every week, anytime that somebody's playing the Eagles, I'm telling you guys to sit them. But yeah, it's no surprise. They're only giving up 8.9 points per game to running backs this year. That's by far the fewest in the NFL. Over the last 4 games, the most yards on the ground that a single running back has gained is 59 yards. And they have only given up 1 running back touchdown over the last 4 games. So this is going to be a touchdown-dependent play. If you end up having to play Pacheco because of injuries or buys, you just got to hope that he finds his way into the end zone on Monday night. My other top sit, it's going to be tough too because he's coming off one of his best games of the season, but it's going to be Javonte Williams against the Vikings. The Vikings are only giving up 12.9 points per game to running backs this year. That is tied for the 5th fewest across the league. Over their last 4 games, the most yards a running back has gained on them is only 51 yards. Now, they have given up 3 running back touchdowns over the last 4 games, but just like I said about Pacheco, it does definitely feel like Williams going to be like I hope he at least gets me a touchdown because the Vikings have been really good at keeping running backs below the 60-yard mark over the last 4 weeks, or at least over their last 4 games. So yeah, those are going to be my top starts and sits at running back. Let's go ahead and keep this train rolling right into the wide receiver position. And speaking of those Chiefs and why everybody can't run on them, as far as the Eagles defense, but if you had a Chiefs wide receiver, I would definitely consider playing them this week. But the guy I definitely trust more than all of them is going to be Rashee Rice against the Eagles. If you maybe on your daily lineups want to sprinkle in a a MVS or a Kadarius Toney, a Justin Watson. You can attempt to do that and see that those cheap plays can pay off for you. But when we look at this matchup, the Eagles are allowing 30.6 points per game to wide receivers this year in fantasy football. That is the most in the NFL. Over their last 4 games, they have allowed 5 different wide receivers to go over 85 receiving yards. And they have given up 6 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So it's a defense that's really good at stopping the run. Teams are forced to throw against them, but they're finding success too, though, throwing the ball against them. So I really like Rashee Rice as a play. And like I said, if you want to maybe in your daily lineups take a chance on an MVS or a Kadarius Toney to see if maybe a cheap play can pop off for you, I would definitely maybe consider doing that as well. But I wouldn't be surprised though we can get Rashee Rice at a cheap rate on these daily lineups on Sunday or Monday for this Monday night game. Moving into my next top start, I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson against the Giants. Obviously, we could definitely trust McLaurin, but Dotson, he's coming off like a blanketed week. I end up having to drop him because I needed a running back because of buys and injuries. But yeah, I think Dotson, though, I think after this past weekend, he's going to bounce back, and I definitely expect a big game out of McLaurin. As far as what the Giants are allowing, they're allowing 27 points a game to wide receivers this year. That is the 3rd most allowed in the NFL. Now, when we look at the history from McLaurin and Dotson against the Giants, McLaurin actually averages 92.5 receiving yards against New York in his career. Now, Dotson has only played the Giants 3 times, but in those 3 games, he's averaging 67.3 receiving yards against them, and he has 2 touchdowns in the 3 games that he's played the Giants in his career. So again, I definitely expect a bounce back performance out of Dotson. He would be a sneaky daily lineup play as well. And then when we look at the last 4 games for the Giants defense, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish over 90 receiving yards, and they've given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns in the last 4 games. Not really giving up the touchdowns, but giving up a lot of yards. So I definitely see some success through the air for Sam Howell, McLaurin, and Dotson on Sunday. Moving into my top sits. My top sit of the week is going to be a Gabe Davis against the Jets. Definitely didn't list Stefon Diggs because you're going to play him, but it's also because the Alphas have done well against this Jets defense. It's the secondary wide receivers in offenses that have struggled. So the reason why I would sit Gabe Davis, first of all, the Jets are only giving up 12.2 points per game to wide receivers this year. That is the fewest in the NFL. Then we look at the last 4 games for Gabe Davis. He has not gone over 40 receiving yards against New York, and throughout all the games that he's played New York, he has never scored a touchdown against the Jets. And then when we look at the last 4 games, only A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams were the receivers that to go over 75 yards. So again, that's Stefon Diggs territory. That's not Gabe Davis territory. And then they have not allowed a wide receiver touchdown in their last 4 games as well. So they're not giving up touchdowns unless you're an alpha wide receiver. Most wide receivers are struggling to put production on the field. And then, like I said, you look at the history of Gabe Davis against the Jets, he has struggled to perform against them. So that's why I would definitely consider sitting him in week 11. My other top sit, I am going to go with Devontae Smith against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are only giving up 18.8 points per game. That is the 7th in the allowed in the across the NFL. They've only actually allowed 1 wide receiver to go over 65 yards in their last 4 games. That was Joshua Palmer a couple of weeks ago. And then they have allowed 4 wide receiver touchdowns in the last 4 games. So this definitely feels like for Devontae, he's going to be a touchdown dependent play because we know A.J. Brown's going to command a lot of the targets. He's probably going to be getting all the production through the air. So unless Devontae Smith can break away for a touchdown, I could see him having more of a floor game than a game that's closer to his ceiling. Moving into the final segment, doing my top starts and sits at the tight end position. My top start of the week, this would definitely be a streaming option. I'm sure he's out there on the waivers for you. But if you struck out on the waivers trying to pick up a tight end, one guy you can consider is going to be Noah Fant against the Rams. The Rams are giving up 9.5 points per game. That is tied for the 2nd most allowed in fantasy football. And then when we look at the last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different tight ends to go over 50 receiving yards, and they have given up 2 tight end touchdowns over their last 4 games. So I definitely like Noah Fant as a sneaky play. Definitely in those daily lineups, you're probably going to be able to get him for a pretty cheap rate. My other top start, I am going to go with Luke Musgrave against the Chargers, the rookie tight end in Green Bay. The Chargers are giving up 8.4 points per game to tight ends. That is the sixth most allowed in the NFL. And then as far as what they have allowed in the last 4 games, they have allowed 3 different tight ends to go over 65 receiving yards, and they have given up 2 tight end touchdowns over the last 4 games. So I like Musgrave as well. He might be out there on the waiver wires if you guys are looking to stream a tight end in week 11. My top sits, this would be a streaming option I would look to avoid, but Cade Otton against the 49ers. 49ers are only giving up 3.8 points per game to tight ends. That's the second fewest in the NFL. Now, TJ Hawkinson in the last 4 games did reach the 86 receiving yard mark, but I wouldn't put Cade Otton in TJ Hawkinson's territory. And then when you look at the next best performance by a tight end in the last 4 games against that 49ers defense, is 24 receiving yards. And that includes David Njoku and Evan Ingram. Both those guys couldn't even get over 25 receiving yards against San Francisco. And they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown in their last 4 games as well. And then my other top sits, a name I just mentioned, David Njoku against the Steelers. Obviously, you got to factor in Deshaun Watson's season's over, so he's going to be playing with the rookie quarterback, or more likely going to be playing with the rookie quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. When we look at this matchup, the Steelers are only giving up 4.4 points per game to tight ends this year. That is tied for the 4th fewest. When you actually look at his career against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he only has 1 game that he's finished over 50 receiving yards, and then he only has 3 touchdowns in 11 career games against the Steelers. So only in 11 career games, only 1 game over 50 yards against the Steelers, and only 3 touchdowns in those 11 games. Now, we look at the last 4 games, Evan Ingram and Luke Musgrave actually finished over 60 receiving yards against them, but the next best tight end finish was 28 yards, and they, just like the 49ers, have not allowed a tight end touchdown over the last 4 games. So for all those reasons would be a reason I would look to avoid David Njoku in my lineups this week. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for week 11 of the season. As always, though, if there's any players I did not talk about, please get in the comments, get in my DMs, shoot me a text message if you have any questions about players you're considering to start or sit this week. As always, hit the like button, subscribe, follow on all my social media platforms. You guys will be getting me next Tuesday night, as always, for my top waiver wire targets and streamable defenses. I'll talk to you guys then. I hope you guys go win your matchups this weekend. Peace out.